speak for the Bible. Open the book and let's have a revival. It's about the truth, it's about survival. Return to the basics, get back in the Bible.
Hello, welcome back everybody, YouTubers and TikTokers. Today we're going to pick up our study on dating the birth of Jesus Christ, which is actually an intro study into dating the entire life of Jesus Christ, including the crucifixion. Before we push forward and try to determine what date Jesus was actually born on, I want to resolve the controversy. There's seemingly a contradiction in the Bible, but a closer inspection shows that there is not. Does Luke contradict Matthew? That's the question. Was Jesus born during the time of Herod the Great, or was Jesus born during 6 AD during the time of the census? Because it's commonly understood Herod unalived in 4 BC. That's a 10-year window of no uncertainty of when Jesus was actually born. But as I said, a closer inspection, we can see that Luke agrees with Matthew that Jesus was born in 4 BC. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right into the scriptures and dive right into the Bible itself. So I actually wrote a script to help me with my slideshow, but it appears like I already gave the introduction, so I'm not going to reread that. But we will be reading Matthew 1, should be Matthew 2, 1 and 1, 5. So it says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem." Luke 1:5 also says, "There was in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zachariah of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth." So Matthew 2:1 explicitly says Jesus was born in the days of Herod the Great. And numerous sources tell us Herod the Great's death would have been approximately 4 BC. In my previous video, I showed that Jesus was conceived during the pregnancy of Elizabeth. Based on the context of John the Baptist's birth narrative, John the Baptist would have been born in the days of Herod the Great, according to Luke 1:5. So let's hypothetically suggest Elizabeth only became pregnant in the days of Herod the Great, and the birth of her child in the year that Herod died. Then Jesus would be born after Herod was dead in 4 BC. This still raises an unsettling issue with Luke chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, where it says, "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor over Syria." Now, throughout the rest of this video, I'll be referring to Cyrenius as Quirinius, same person, different names, different language. So here at face value is the greatest problem with Matthew and Luke's birth narration. There's an abundance of reliable information that Quirinius' census took place in 6 AD. If I grant that Jesus was born after Herod died, it would still be no more than a year after Herod died, given the context of Luke 1:5 through 10. That would put us in 3 BC, which would be 9 years difference from 6 AD. However, Luke actually gives us other context to suggest that Jesus was born during 6 AD. So is there a chance that this census is not the census of 6 AD? I strongly believe so. Let's begin. So in Luke chapter 3, 1 through 3, it says, "Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea, of the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanitis. That's a hard word for me to say, sorry. The tetrarch of Abilene. Annas and Caiaphas, being the high priest, the word of the Lord came to John in the wilderness. And he came into all the country about the Jordan, preaching the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. Now notice, Luke gives us multiple points to specify the specific time in which John the Baptist would be preaching in the wilderness. The one that I want to focus on specifically is the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. This timeline represents the years of Tiberius' reign in contrast to Jesus' age at his baptism. I didn't include a slide, but you can see it right down here. In Luke 1:23, it says that Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age. I didn't include that. I will include that, and the link to this slideshow will be in the description of the YouTube video for your studies. So let me just continue. This timeline represents the years of Tiberius' reign in contrast to Jesus' age at baptism, which would be about 30 years of age. It's commonly accepted Tiberius began reigning in September 17th, 14 AD. So if you were to count forward from 14 AD for 15 years, you would come up to 28 AD. Now, if Jesus was beginning to be 30 years of old in 28 AD, we should be able to count backwards from 28 AD to his birth year. Strikingly, it appears that Luke chapter 3 is telling us Jesus was born in 3 BC. Now, in future videos, I'll show a small modification which would actually make it 4 BC, but this is rough figures. Now, this is remarkably close to Matthew's version of when Jesus was actually born. We must ask ourselves, why is it that we have two witnesses in Luke's gospel pointing to the time of Herod's reign for Jesus' birth? Yet, Luke chapter 2 indicates that Jesus was born in 10 years later. What I want to propose to you is the possibility that 6 AD was not the first census, nor was it the first time that Quirinius governed Syria. Here's a small portion of a reconstructed timeline of the Roman Syrian governors that I got from Wikipedia. Apparently, 4 BC to 1 AD is debated among scholars with no certainty of who actually governed those years. However, there is something worth considering which can actually reconcile why Luke points to the reign of Herod the Great in Luke 1 and 3. This is the stone of Tiber, which was discovered in 1764. It is written in Latin, and some of the Latin is lost. However, what we have is translated to English, and I will read it for you. It says, "He waged war against a tribe of the Homonenses," it's a hard word for me to say, "who had unalived King Amnitus. After they had been brought under the authority of Emperor Caesar Augustus, the Roman people, the Senate decreed 2 public thanksgivings to the immortal gods for his successful achievements and granted him the honorary triumphal Insignia. As proconsul, he governed the province of Asia. As representative legate of the divine Augustus, he governed Syria and Phoenicia a second time. So we see it says he waged war against the tribe of the Homonadenses, who had unalived King Amyntas after they had been brought under the authority of the Emperor Caesar Augustus. Okay. So who would this be? I thought I gave a little bit more commentary here, but who would this be? Well, the fact is, there's no name written on this stone because it was damaged. But there are witnesses in history that would tell us who this would be. Let's move on to Strabo. Strabo lived 64 BC, long before Jesus was born, to about 24 AD before Jesus had died. It's very unlikely that he has any Christian or Jewish influence to try to reconcile Luke chapter 3. And this is what he says. It says, now Amyntas captured Crimna, and passing through the country of the Hamanades, who were considered too strong to capture, and having now established himself as master of those places, having even slain their tyrant, was caught by treachery after the artifice of the tyrant's wife. And he was put to unalivement by those people, but Cyrenius overthrew the inhabitants by starving them. Notice Strabo mentions the death of Amyntas and how Amyntas could not overthrow the Hamanades. Yet Quirinius overthrew them by starving them, just as the stone of Tiber says about the unnamed referent that governed Syria a second time. There's a second witness. Cornelius Tacitus lived between 56 AD to 120 AD. I don't know much about him, but again, I doubt he's trying to reconcile Luke chapter 3 with Matthew's gospel. But this is what he says about the situation. About the same time, he requested the Senate to let the death of Sulpicius Quirinius be celebrated with the public funeral, and he in the context is Tiberius, wants Quirinius to be celebrated with a public funeral. With the old patrician family of the Sulpici, this Quirinius, who was born in the town of Lanuvium, was quite unconnected, an indefatigable soldier, meaning he didn't tire. He had by his zealous service won the consulship under divine Augustus, and subsequently the honors of triumph for having stormed some fortresses of the Hamonadenses in Cilicia. Tacitus is a second ancient witness that tells us that it was Quirinius who triumphantly stormed the fortress of the Hamonadenses. This event won him consulship with Augustus. So, taken together, this is the conclusion we have. It's very likely that the one who governed a second time in Syria would have been Quirinius. The stone of Tiber attributes that to he who waged war against the Hamanadenses, who is also credited with bringing them under the authority of Caesar Augustus. One of the greatest obstacles in this conclusion is the absence of the name of who he refers to in the stone of Tiber. However, the testimony of both Strabo and Tacitus is extremely compelling because they accredit the person for bringing the Hamanides under Roman rule would be Quirinius. Now the question remains, when did this triumph, which would lead to consulship, take place? Okay. I'm just going to read what I have on the picture before I read the commentary that I included. It says, between 12 BC and 2 CE, or 2 AD, he subjugated the Hamanidenses. The precise date of this war and the command held by Quirinius are disputed. This comes from the Oxford University Dictionary. I chose to cite the Oxford Classical Dictionary rather than any biblical related source. This way I could get a neutral date range of the war. The date range given is 12 BC to 2 AD, which is long before 6 AD. The legendary census of Quirinius. Remember, Quirinius is tied directly to the successor of this war, and the stone of Tiber attributes that successor to he who governed a second time in Syria. This leads me to believe that Quirinius governed twice in Syria, once in 4 BC and the second time in 6 AD. So, let's have a look again at Luke chapter 2, verse 2. It says, and this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. I want to consider that in Luke 2, it says this taxation was first made, indicating that there were multiple taxations. However, I want to emphasize that the Greek word apographe means a registration or enrollment. Yet Luke 2 doesn't tell us what the registration or enrollment was for. Therefore, we should not automatically assume that there was a census or a taxation that took place. Also, it says Quirinius was governor of Syria, but it does not say that he was governor of Syria and Judea. This is significant because Archelaus wasn't removed until 6 AD. That is when the Syrian governor had authority over Judah because of the annexation of Rome. Now, I will answer my opening questions. Was Jesus born in 4 BC or 6 AD? Was he born in the reign of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BC, or during the census of 6 AD? I find it significant that the birth of John the Baptist and the date of Jesus' birth 30 years from the 15th year of Tiberius are both the approximate in the proximity of Herod the Great's reign. Also, the evidence to make a census or taxation narrative absolute is insufficient, and to say Quirinius had authority over Syria doesn't automatically mean he had authority over Judah also, which could put him in the time frame of executing authority over Syria before he had authority over Syria and Judea. One must remember, the stone of Tiber attributes the conqueror of the Hamanides to he who governed Syria a second time and both Strabo and Tacitus accredit Quirinius as the conqueror of the Hamanides. So does Matthew and Luke's narrative contradict? On the surface, one might think so. But a deeper inspection demonstrates two independent witnesses of a 4 BC birth narrative and one obstacle that is not absolute. Join me again as we narrow the date of Jesus' birth to two key historical markers: the death of Herod the Great and the baptism of Jesus Christ. Thank you all for joining me. Like and share this with your friends so that we can let the world know that Matthew and Luke agree on the birth narrative of Jesus Christ, that he was born in 4 BC. Stay tuned for the next series, which will be likely next weekend. The death of Herod the Great marks Jesus' birth year, and you can actually count backwards from Jesus' baptism to his birth year. Thank you. Stay tuned.